Hello, I'm just going to be going over Lerp and timelines from one newbie to another. I am not a expert by any stretch of the imagination, but as I was learning, this sort of came up, and I just was playing around and wanted to show you guys how I sort of came to understand them at least a little bit. Um, So basically, the Lerp stands for linear interpolation, and you're going to use it for smooth transitions, whether it's like blinking a light or moving an object, and countless other things that I've seen in videos, but just to sort of go over the very basics. So for instance, if you look here, you can blink the light and you can move the ball slowly, and we'll just go over how to do that. Alright, so without further ado, I am just going to start a new level and set things up. Please forgive me for putzing around a little bit in the interface. Like I said, I'm also quite new, so I'm going to go to File, New Level, and make it just a basic level. Alright. So we have the floor. I'm just going to delete it. And I am going to make a little tract. So I'm just going to pull a box in. And I am going to first start its location at the world origin. I am going to make it in the x direction 500 long, 40 centimeters wide, and 20 centimeters tall. Alright, so we have a little tract. Now remember, the world origin's at 0, 0, it's 500 long, so it's 250 forward, 250 backwards. So in order to move this edge to there, I'm going to have to offset it by 250 centimeters, and there. Now it should be at the world origin, and I'm going to duplicate it so I have a track that's 1,000 long, and so that should be from 0 to 500, and this should start. This is now halfway from the next one, so that starts at 500, 750, and then 1,000. Okay. Now I need some materials just to show you that, so we'll make some new materials. And I'm just going to make a black and a white material. So let's just double click here and just pull this off and go type vector. And it's already black, so that's great. Save it. And then we're going to make this one white. Type vector again, get this vector parameter, and I'm going to double click it and pull the value all the way to white. Well, close enough. Alright. Save. Alright, and now I'm just going to apply it to our tract. So we'll start out with some black over here, and some white over there. Ooh, missed. There we go. Here, just to make it look a little prettier. Put it on the sides there. There we go. Alright. So now we're going to make a sphere, a ball. And we're going to make the ball as a blueprint so we can show you how to move it and stuff. So we're going to make a new blueprint class. It's going to be an actor. Call it BP ball. Double click on it. We are going to add a static mesh component. And that's fine. We'll just leave it default. And we're going to come over here and select a sphere. Okay, now we have a nice big ball, and we're going to make it a nice silver color. Let's see, steel. How about steel? Let's go with just good old steel. Alright, so we have a big ball. Compile and save it, and close it. And now I'm going to move this ball here, and we're going to set its location to 0, 0, 0. All right. So now the question is, we want to move this ball smoothly to the end, and we want to do it over time. But to do that, we're going to use something called linear interpolation, and that's going to set a sort of a point from the beginning to the end, and based on a value called the alpha value, it's going to move the ball along the line. So let us go into the blueprint. All right, so we have the event graph, and we have the begin play. So the first thing we're going to do is type here Lerp. And you can see there's Lerp, and there's just the regular Lerp, and that'll be a float value, and we'll use that later when we do the timelines, rotator, transform, and vector. And vector is what we're going to use to move the object, because any location in Unreal is in a vector form. Alright, so as you can see, we have this thing called a Lerp and a vector. And the only value I'm going to change is x. We're just going to move it along the x-axis. And it starts off with a starting point, which is a finishing point, which is b, and then the alpha goes from 0 to 1, but it actually can go outside those values. But to start out with, we'll just think about it as 0 to 1. And when the alpha is 0, you're at the starting coordinate, and when your alpha is 1, you're at the final coordinate. So let's just do that. We know that the track, we're starting at the world origin, so point A is 0, 0, 0. Point B, we know that I made the track 1,000 long, so the final point will be 1,000 in the x, 1,000 centimeters. Okay? Now the last thing we need to do is we need to move the ball. So we're going to do that by setting its location. So set location. And sometimes the context sensitive, I'll have to figure that out later, but set actor location. There we go. Set actor location. It's interesting that it's, oh, never mind, it's there. Alright. So I'm going to drag from the event begin play to there, and I'm going to set the new location based on this Lerp. Okay, and so remember, point A is the beginning point at 0, point B is the ending point 1,000 when it's 0. So if I push play, nothing should happen. Let's just make sure that that works. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to push play, and nothing happens. The ball is at alpha 0, so the ball's at 0, 0, 0. Now let's come back, and I'm going to make the alpha 1. Now it should be all B, so the ball should fly to B, and let's just make sure that's right. So compile, save, close it, and I push the play button, and there it goes. Flies all the way over. How about values in between? So let's come back. So now we know what it's basically doing is making a line, a straight line between 0 and 1,000. And the alpha is the sort of position along that line. So if 1 is 1,000 and 0 is 0, then in theory 0.5 alpha should be halfway between 0 and 1, and therefore halfway between 0 and 1,000. So if I come here and I hit compile and save and I play, the ball moves to halfway. Now what's important to realize is that it's making a line. And the alpha, 0 is the starting and 1 is the ending, but you can actually have values even beyond that. So for instance, if I set the value at 2, well, let's think about that. So at 1 it was 1,000, at 2, and it was a straight line between 0 and 1,000, at 2 it's going to be 2,000 out, at least it should be. So by putting in an alpha greater than 1, I'm going to send it further down the line that it has made. So let's see. So we'll close that out, and we will run it. And there it is. See, it's moved 500, 1,000, and then another 1,000 even further. If you can come and fly around, you can see that that is about that length. All right. Now it can go backwards too, so let's just do that quickly. So let's make the alpha now negative 0.5. So now it should be back 500 because the line was going from 0 to 1,000. If it's moving negative half of what it should be negative 500. So let's just do that. And we will compile saved, and we will push play, which is there. And look, there it is, halfway backwards. Now the other thing you have to realize is that it actually makes a direction. So the vector has a directionality to it. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if you're in fact going the opposite way, let's say we start at 1,000 and go to 0. So now we're starting way at the end, we're going to 0. If the alpha is 0, where should it be? Well, it should be at the starting point A, which is 1,000. So we're going to compile and save it, and we hit play. Now it's over there. And if I do an alpha of 1, we'll moved it back to the start. So compile, save, and play. And there it is, sitting at the beginning. The last thing I want to show you is because the directionality has changed, if I make it a bigger value, like for instance 1.5, now remember the line is going the opposite way, so in theory it should now be at negative 500, right? Because it went to 0, 1 was all the way to 0, and then another half. So let's just make sure that that's true, and we'll hit play, and there it goes. It moved back 500 because now the line is moving this way. So bigger values will actually send it in the negative direction. And conversely, I hope this isn't getting too pedantic, but conversely, if I have a negative 0.5, well, now it should be further out field. Compile, save, and play. And there we go. It's now further out because the line was going this way, so sending it and starting over here, so negative actually moved it in the positive direction. I hope that makes sense. All right. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is, now that we have this sort of track established, how do I move the ball slowly along that line? And the trick is going to be, if we come back to our blueprint, that this alpha value, instead of me plugging in each number every time to move it, if you think about it, you can probably change that number slowly over time from 0. Well, let's change this back, right? That's its origin, and let's say I wanted to move it down to the end of the track. We can start the number at 0 and using a counter over time slowly increase this number, and as it slowly increases this number, it's going to slide along that line. So at 0 it's going to be 0, at 0.1 it's going to be at 100, at 0.2 it's going to be 200, at 0.3 it's going to be 300, and slowly. And obviously with each frame you can interpolate the line so you get a very nice smooth animation. So let's go ahead and do that next. All right. So this is where a timeline comes into play, and a timeline is going to be important. All right, let's move this a little bit. A timeline is going to be important in smoothly changing that alpha value. So we can right click here, and if you want to, you can scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's add timeline. All right, and we'll just call this shoot, sorry. Let's just close this for a second. All right, I want to rename it, so let's hit F2. Ball move. All right. So how does this work? So basically, I need something that's going to change this value over time. And that's what this is going to do. So I'm going to double click the ball move, and it's going to open up this ball move template on the timeline. And what you want for each timeline is a track. And that track for us is just going to be changing one number, one floating point number. And so we're going to make a float track. And the length is in time in seconds. And I want to move this ball over 2 seconds along that line. So I'm going to hit 2 here. All right. And now I've got this timeline. And remember, I want that value, I know I want the value to go between the beginning and the end, which is going to be from 0, an alpha value of 0 to 1. So I want this timeline to go from 0 to 1. So at 0 seconds, that's this up here, here's the timeline to 2 seconds. And here's the value. At 0 seconds, I want it to be 0. So I'm going to hit Shift and click. And it's going to put a number close enough, but you can type it in here, so 0 and 0. And hit Shift and click again. It doesn't matter where you put it, because now it's selected. So you can select them like that. And at 2 seconds, I am going to make the value 1. Alright, and now it got kind of out of frame, so you can click these to zoom to fit. And so now you can see this nice line that's going from 0 to 2 seconds and from 0 value to 1. Okay. So now we'll save it and compile it. Then we'll go back to the event graph. Okay. So now we have a track. See how it says new track? I probably should have labeled it, but whatever. It's called new track now. And that new track is going to output those values slowly over time, over 2 seconds, between 0 and 1. So I'm going to plug that right into alpha. And now, when we begin play, right now I have not connected it, so I'm going to connect it to play. And then the update. So each time it updates, which should be per frame, at least I think, it will change the value. Just slowly moving along that line through the alpha values between 0 and 1. So let's compile and save it. And we are going to close the ball asset, and I'm going to hit play. And there it goes. Over 2 seconds, it moved that alpha value between 0 and 1, which is between 0 and 1,000. And similarly, so now you can get a little bit fancy with the graph. And this is where things can get a tiny bit confusing. But okay, so now we know that if I move the timeline between 0 and 1, I'll get between 0 and 1,000. But I know my alpha values can go higher and lower. So let's play with the track just a little, and I'll show you what we can do. Let's zoom out. Let's say I want the ball to oscillate between their, let's say, let's do 2 times in 2 seconds. So I know at half a second I want it to be all the way to 1. And then I want it back to 0 at 1 second. And then I want it to go again back to 1,000, which will be 1. And then finally come back to the start at 0. So we can double check these points. This should be perfect from before. This should be perfect. Oh, nope. So 0.5 and 1 second. Pretty close. Probably wouldn't notice it. And at 1 second, we want it to be 0 again. And at 1.5 seconds, we want it to be 1. And finally, at 2 seconds, we want it to be 0 again. So now, what should happen is it should oscillate back and forth. Right? 0 to 1,000, back to 0, back to 1,000, back to 0. So compile and save, close it, and we'll hit play. And there it goes. Now, what if you want to go out of the range? You can do that, right? So if, for instance, I wanted to go even further out, now it's going to interpolate along the line to there. So now it should be, if it had gone to 1, it would have gone to 1,000, but now the alpha value is going to be 2, and so it's going to go to 2,000. And if I wanted to go a little bit behind, so we'll click that value and we'll make it so at half a second, we're going to make it 2 for 2,000. And at this point, I'm going to move it even further backwards. So at 1 second, I want the alpha value to be negative 0.5. There we go. And then back to 1,000 and then back. So now let's now let's see this go, and we'll hit play, and you see it went shooting past. So that's ways that you can use linear interpolation to move it, and the event graph to give you alpha values even outside of the range of 0 to 1 to move it to various locations. Great. I hope that was clear enough. I can do a blinking light if you want to as well, just to show you that thing. So let's make a new blueprint class, actor, BP light. Let's call it point light. All right. So I'm going to double click, and instead of adding a static mesh, I am going to add a point light. Oh, it's kind of there, but you can also search for point light, and there it is. Okay, so now I have a point light for a component, and let's make it nice and red colored light. All right. And again, the intensity setting it, I can set it to whatever I want, but what's really going to matter is what I'm going to do with my interpolation. So let's make it blink. And just to make things a little more advanced, we'll start out with it bright and then dim, and then we'll show you how to do the opposite direction. Okay, so let's close this out. Drag a point light on here, and obviously it's bright and red. All right. So now let's open the event graph, and we're going to go from the beginning. So I want it to start out bright and then kind of get dim. So the light's intensity, so I'm going to drag my point light out to get a reference, and I'm going to set intensity. So the intensity is a float value that that's going to decide how intense the light is. All right. So now what do I need? Well, I want to make it smoothly transition between bright and dim. And so how do I do that? Well, I need a lerp. And this time, I just want a float lerp, because I'm not moving it to two different vector coordinates. Obviously, last time we were only just doing x, so we probably could have figured it out with just using a float. But let's say you wanted to move it in a much different direction, you would have to use those vector lerps. But in this case, we just need one value, so we're just going to use a float. And we're going to make it go from starting out really bright, let's just say 20,000 to 0. I guess let's do 10,000 to make life a little bit simpler on math. All right, so we're starting out actually bright, and then we're going dim. And just to remind you really quickly, at alpha 0, you're going to start out at 10,000. At alpha 1, you're going to go down to 0. So just showing you that now, we're going to compile save, and I'm going to hit play. Just going to do this really quickly, and you can see it's bright right here the whole time. Whereas if I go to an alpha of 1, now it's at 0. So it should not light up at all. And we're going to hit close and hit play. Oops. What happened? It's still bright. Point light intensity alpha is 1. Should be 0. Oh, I know. You have to connect it. Alright. See, I told you I was new. Alright. Save. Compile. Now when we hit play, it's off. Okay, great. So, let's make it blink. And what are we going to do? Well, we need a timeline, right? We want to go from one value to another smoothly over time, so we need a timeline. click timeline, and we just click at the bottom, add timeline. All right, we'll call this light timeline. And now I'm not going to forget to connect it, so we'll start with play, and remember we're going to update the intensity. So there we go. And now we need to figure out our alpha value. So we need a new track that's going to plug into that alpha value and move that alpha along that line over time. So let's double click on the timeline and add a new track. And again, we're going to do a float track because we just need to change that alpha value. So remember, it's already starting out bright. So this is where things are going to be a little bit backwards, right? So if I start out at 0, it's going to be bright. And if I move it to 1, let's say over 2 seconds, it's going to shut off. Does that make sense? Because now we're going backwards. So 0 in this case is bright. So at 0 seconds, it's going to be the brightest it is. And over here, at 2 seconds, it's going to be off. So let's just compile and save it, close it, and hit play. What did I do wrong? I know what I did wrong. All right, so we did that, but we didn't connect it. So again, connect the track to the alpha, and now it will change the values along the line. All right, so compile and save, and close, and hit play. And you can see it dim. Did you see it dim? Right here. See it dimming over time? So in that case, we went the opposite way. And so let's just double click here. So don't get fooled if you come here. If I want to make it more intense, the wrong answer to blink it more intensely would be to go to 2. And I'll show you why. Here, in fact, let's make it what we would think is goofily bright. Let's make it 8. So at 1 second, let's make it 8. Let's delete that one. All right. Oh, and I should make the timeline 2 seconds. So that's the other error I did. Compile and save. And if we hit play, it didn't really work, right? It just turned off immediately. And it never got brighter. And why is that? Well, because remember, our alpha value it's going to 8 on the timeline, which should be 80,000, right? You're making a line between 0 and 10,000. So if you're halfway at 1 second, at 8, you should be 8 times that, right? 80,000. But for some reason, it's turning right off. Well, why is it? Because remember, it's starting out the other way. So in this case, we actually need it to be -8. So at 1 second, I'm going to go -8. And it should actually, as we go further backwards along the line, we're actually moving back from 1,000 or 10,000. So we're really moving up. We're actually moving up and up and up and up as we go down. All right, because we're going backwards along that line. So compile, save, and now when we hit play, it should get really bright in the dim. Well, you can't really see it that well, but actually, if I stop the ball from moving, let's do that. Let's just kill the ball for a second. We should be able to see the light a little better since the ball is there. So it gets really bright and then dim. You see that? Bright and then dim. Okay. Well, I hope you guys learned a little something, or if that made sense to people. Sorry, when I first heard it, it was a little bit confusing to me, and then I sort of made a little track to better understand it, and I hope that helps you too if you are having a little bit of trouble understanding it. Best of luck.